A very good morning and a heartfelt welcome to all the eminent dignitaries, professors, research scholars, and students present in the third session of the 3 day long national level e-conference on contemporary trends in literature, organized by Department of English, Munger University. After two excellent brainstorming sessions yesterday, we are here for our third session. And in this session, I have someone with me who needs no introduction in academia. I am extremely delighted and absolutely honored to invite Professor H. Kalpana, Head Department of English and Comparative Literature, Pondicherry University, for this virtual talk. She is, on one hand, an erudite speaker, an extremely knowledgeable scholar, an ever inspiring teacher, and on the other hand, a good, humble human being who is always so down to earth despite her immense scholarly achievements, which makes her even more special. She possesses a rare strength to leave a long impression among her students' life, and I am happy to say that I am one of her. Professor Dr. H. Kalpana teaches at Department of English, Pondicherry University, Pondicherry. She completed her post-graduation at Bangalore University and her MPhil and PhD from Pondicherry University. As a recipient of Sastry Indo-Canadian Institute's Graduate Research Award in 1994, she was affiliated to the University of Alberta, Edmonton, Canada, where she was mentored by Professor Stephen Slemon, an eminent postcolonial critic. She received her doctorate in 1996 for the thesis Reshaping the Self, Feminine Identity in the Short Stories of Alice Munro and Shashi Deshpande. She is also a certificate and diploma holder in the teaching English from FLU Hyderabad and a diploma holder in translation studies from Hyderabad Central University. Her affiliations to various academic bodies such as the Modern Language Association USA, Indian Association for Commonwealth Language and Literature, and Indian Associations for Women's Studies substantiate her academic interests. She is the recipient of Pondicherry University Gold Medal for MPhil, MHRD's Department of Culture's Junior Research Fellowship, Indian Institute of Advanced Studies Associateship, UGC's Major Research Project Grant, Fulbright Study of Institutions Award, University of Gothenburg's Research Associateship, and SICI's Faculty Mobility Fellowship. The University of Debrecen, Hungary, had invited her for the prestigious Foundation Day talk in November 2018. She has a number of publications to her credit, including a book titled as Quilting Relationship, a Cruise Through Comparative Literary Studies. Besides reading, she likes music, nature, and all things great and small. So, without wasting any more time, may I invite ma'am for her talk and introduction to the chaos theory. Ma'am, the virtual podium is all yours.
Thank you so much, Anindra. I have told you many times, I've told many others who have always been telling that all these academic backgrounds that are given somehow make me feel very embarrassed. And I'm much more happy thinking that I'm a teacher, which is what I enjoy doing most. Every class that I've taken till today, I have liked and enjoyed it. That's where I stand. And at the outset, let me thank Munger University for giving me this opportunity. Let me also take this opportunity to thank the head of the department as well as all the faculty members from the Department of English at Munger University. And of course, without saying, the support that has come from the Vice Chancellor for this particular program. I'm indeed happy to be here. And let us not spend too much time in other things because I'm thinking that many of you would like to know what I would be talking about and what is, I think some of you may have an idea about what is chaos theory, but some others may not. And I'm not trying to say that I'm a specialist in it, but I thought that when we are doing theories, we need to actually start looking at why theories are essential. So I will be talking to you mostly by using a PPT because many times that when we give talks just without having a PowerPoint, they become a bit meaningless, especially with the virtual platform. I think it is better that I use a PowerPoint. Just give me a second to shift to the screen and then we will start with the talk. Is it visible? Hello? Hello, is it visible?
It's not. It's not visible, ma'am, yet.
Okay, okay, is it visible? All right, fine. So this is the, you see that we start with something called as, it's
Ma'am,
just
it's
for
not
fun,
visible
I've
yet.
put a cartoon, but it's
Sorry,
not yet
ma'am.
visible.
No, no, not yet, ma'am.
Is it visible?
No, ma'am, not yet.
Shall I go back and again start?
Ha, ha. Sure, ma'am.
Is it visible now?
Um, yes, ma'am. It's visible now.
It is visible, I think, yes.
Yes, yes, yes. It's clear now.
So I begin with just a small, yeah, I begin with a very small comic strip so that you just are not very bored with what I'm trying to tell you. And one of the things why I put this is that there is always this question about whether humanities needs, does it need a theory? And question is, what is the function of literature? How does literature participate in life? So these are queries that we all have in mind because most of the time we are under the impression that we do not need anything that possibly is a theory. And if you have looked at basically the problematics of theory, which many people feel, even today, that is one of the trends, that many academicians feel that theory itself is a problematic thing. The arguments that they place is that a text is generally something that is a point of pleasure. It is more an artistic one and which should derive you a sense of happiness, satisfaction, pleasure when you read. And in a way, when you use theories, there is a devaluation of aesthetics. And final point, of course, that it is a creative art and it should not be removed from the emotional sphere in which it stands. And it is not in any way something that is like science, which is objective. And it should be more devoted to the individual. So these are arguments people are making over and over again. And today, in fact, we have come to a stage where people are thinking that we are having too much theory, and there are many older people who think that we have lost the emphasis of literature itself. I'm not so sure because I think we have to understand the fact that theory and everyday reading, you see, every single thing that you read day in and day out, you theorize. You might not know it, but you theorize. There is an unconscious theory that happens or a framework of mind that happens. It may be very self conscious, it may be subjective. I have given you here two examples. The first one is from a literary text. I think you know the text, many of you know that. Maybe if you don't know at the end, you ask me, I'll tell you. And this is a statement where it says that, the main line, I'm not looking at the whole of the quote. It says, you have no business to take our books. You are a dependent Mama says, you have no money, your father left you none. Now, this immediately strikes a bond, especially for many of us, because the word that strikes us is the word dependent. Immediately, it brings into your mind the sense of power, the sense of have and have nots, the sense of somebody who has not got anything in life. So, there are a number of things that crop up in your mind. And maybe, if you are situated in the present day social reality, you might start wondering, especially, or you relate it to something like the notion of the problems of the migrants today. Or if you have, visited some place where there have been a lot of people living in poverty, maybe you think about it. So there are these things which have come into your mind. Why did they come? They have come because you have had some kind of background or experience which you have used to formulate your own ideas. Similarly, I've given the second statement there that on July 11th last year, I was visiting at the spot where there was a protest over the police arrest of the colored man. Now, this is an innocent remark I made, but any of you who are reading it may assume a number of things because of the backdrop of the violence that happened some time back with regard to the notion of the colored in USA. You may start wondering at what I was doing sitting there. Was I a protester or was I just visiting the place? So you start theorizing, thinking that, and also some of you who may know me, and you might think, oh yes, maybe she had an academic interest, or somebody else who doesn't know me think that I probably am a protester who is, participating in this political activities. Without even knowing me, you might think that I may be somebody who is politically very active. Now you see that you have presupposed a theory. Without even thinking anything, you have done some kind of supposition. So this leads us to a point where I'm quoting from the Teaching of Literature by Gerald Graff, where he says there are two quotes that I've used, that any particular reading experience is determined not only by the text in question, but also by the choice of interests the reader brings to the text before reading it. So, in a way, what you're trying to tell is that any of these statements that you are doing refers to the fact that a reading experience is determined not just by the text but also the interest that the reader carries. So, it depends on you, the reader, not so much on the content that is there. The second that he says is that it is not just what we read, but how we read it that strongly conditions the results of our reading. So it also depends on the moments in which you are reading. If you are in a very happy state of mind, probably the way you read it may be different. If you are unhappy, you may read it in a different way. If you are troubled, you may read it in a different way. And this is the reason that most of us, when we read text and we reread it and we reread it, every time we read, we have different impressions. So it is not very true that we don't use theory at all. We do use some way or the other. And those of them who say that we do not need theory, I think they're making a mistake because we always are doing some kind of presupposition in our mind. Now, why is it that we need this kind of theories is a question mark. The reason we need it is that, in a way, literature is something which has to be engaged with the civic policies and the social reality. Unfortunately, today we have come to a stage where we are doing literature sitting in rooms and not bothered about what is happening around us. This is one of the problems of literature. So, the hypothesis about meaning obtained by observation, evidence, and so on has metamorphosed into a new arena, and we have come up with notions of formalism, structuralism, postmodernism, and we have started to question the notions of identity itself and the notion of inequality. But today, the notion of survival today itself has become extremely problematic because we are looking at the idea that there is a pandemic. We are starting to wondering what is existence itself. We are wondering what is life and what is death. We are wondering There are many people who are worried, even if with the birth of a child, wondering into what kind of world they are bringing this child. How do we deal with the reality that is around us in situations like this? And also, when all this is happening, unfortunately, how are some people who are sitting in power positions doing work or doing a kind of policies by which they might be harming others, or not at all bothered about what is happening around them, but just thinking that this is what they need to do? So now, who are the people who are going to look at this and question? It is we, the humanists. If we don't generate the ideas, then literature has no sense or no meaning in today's world. So the need for meaning is what at least is the question that we start with. Why we are continuously looking at meaning? Because literature today has become extremely interdisciplinary. It is drawing from every kind of source. And that is one of the statements I want to make, that I am looking at a scientific theory. I am looking at it because I feel that it helps me to understand how to and recognize the disorder that is around me today. So it is also with the pandemic around, simple questions that you had about modernity, about history itself has to be reframed today. Today, no longer can we talk about time and history as we used to do earlier. There is a prevailing sense of darkness, confusion, and disorder.
Sorry to interrupt you, ma'am.
And the notion
Ma'am,
is
sorry
that
to interrupt you.
how are we going to look at this? How are we going to bother about this? And are we in any way going to read this in a different kind of way? So these are some of the queries that I would be liking to look at or bother about. See, I have just given you one more cartoon. You can just humorously look at it. It's nothing to do with the fact that I didn't drop any notes, nor did I drop anything, but it's just the fact that, chaos has led to more chaos. So this, I hope, doesn't happen by the end of my lecture. So
Ma'am,
let us
sorry to
start by
interrupt
the
you.
definition of what we mean by chaos. There
Hello,
are two
ma'am.
definitions that I'm giving. Yes, yes,
Ma'am, sorry to
Anindra, can you
interrupt
hear
you.
me?
Ma'am,
Yes.
I guess you have some plugging problem with the plugging. I mean, the plugging of the microphone.
You can't hear me?
It's broken,
Oh,
ma'am. Actually,
can you
now
hear
it's
me
clear.
now?
Now it's clear, ma'am. Now it's clear,
Okay.
ma'am. Please
So,
carry on.
yeah, now it is clear. So, the definition of chaos theory are two things. One is that the first one, it is something that I've taken from a critic called as Kellert, who characterizes chaos theory as a qualitative study of unstable, aperiodic behavior in deterministic, non-linear systems. I'm going to spend some time explaining to you with these words like unstable, deterministic, and nonlinear, so don't worry too much about the definition. The second definition that comes is about what is called as deterministic chaos, which suggests a paradox because it connects two notions that are familiar and commonly regarded as incompatible. This is taken from the Encyclopedia Britannica. The third definition says that this is from the Fractal Foundation. It says that chaos is the science of surprises, of the non-linear and the unpredictable. It teaches us to expect the unexpected. While most traditional science deals with predictable phenomena, chaos theory deals with something that is non-predictable. So we are looking at these kinds of definitions that have come, and let me move over to give a better explanation, especially about the linear and non-linear. You see that the word chaos itself means disarray. But in the notion of the scientific thought, it just refers to the idea of change. Now, change, according to science, is something that happens over a period of time, and it can be either linear or non-linear. I've given you two examples here. One is, let's say, that the physical growth of an animal or a human being. The second is about weather conditions or the prices of petrol or something like that. To make it more clear for you, I have given you three graphs. Please look at them for a second and then I'll explain. The first graph is the graph that tells you about somebody who has started life and they are aging and the time that they are 90 years. Let's say they've started at the time they were born and the time they are about to be very old. I have not, this is just, I've taken the pictures, so don't think that, I have not put anything there. It's not just the images. I just wanted to make a statement. The second is that, unemployment rate, which has come after the COVID-19. If you have looked at this, this is a bit curvy. It is not a straight line. The third example I've given you is about, the notion of, let's say, the price that petrol has gone through in the period of 1 year. Now, if you have looked at the first slide, which I go back to, and you've looked at the second and the third slides, I think you will understand if I ask you the question which is linear and which is non-linear, you will tell me the slide 1 is linear and slide 2 and slide 3 are non-linear because they're not straight lines. So in a way, when we are looking at chaos theory, we are determining the notion that there is a disarray or that things are not in a proper manner because of this. So I explained to you what I mean by non-linear. Non-linear refers to the fact that there are gaps or there are ups and downs, and these is something that is non-linear. Let me move a little more. I started with the definition. I hope you understood that. Then I looked at linear and non-linear to explain that to you. And now I look at something called as, just why it has become very important. It became a darling of the pop science or popular science writers in the 1980s. In fact, in the 1980s, there were a number of things that came up, even, talk shows that came up using chaos theory. There were comic strips that came using comic theory. The chaos theory. There were also films that came. And so, in a way, as Robert Devani says, has taken, the third great scientific revolution of the 20th century was the chaos theory. Now, let me go back to that question of the determinism that I had talked to you about, which I told you I'll explain. Now, the traditional idea of the universe, if you have looked at what you regard to be as universe, you see, the universe, if you have looked at it for somebody like Newton, the universe is something that is rationalistic, deterministic, and of clockwork order. The reason is that people like Newton and others who come up with the notion of gravity, or even somebody who comes with the notion of, the revolution of the earth, there is a statement that these are all time bound and that over a period of years that this kind of thing happens. That is the reason why we have time, a chronological sense of time. We talk about 365 days in a year. We talk about, minutes. We talk about seconds, because these all have come from this very traditional idea of the universe. But let us say that, for example, somebody like Orwell, if you have read Orwell's 1984, the very first line he makes is that, the clock is striking 13, and you wonder whether the clock can strike 13. So there is this idea that somewhere at an imaginary level, maybe there is a non-rational, non-deterministic kind of universe. So what we are looking at in the traditional sense is that there is a predictability, there is a very clear sense of cause, there is a patterning of the universe, and a grand overarching kind of theory which establishes that the universe is ordered, closed, and deterministic. So we are all working on this principle, thinking that science makes sense to us because everything has been explained very, very correctly to all of us We understand what is predictable, we understand patterns, and we think that in many ways, even simple thing like behavior, you think it won't go against the grain. You think that behavior is conditioned in such a way that it will be possible that once you're conditioning or socializing, behavior would happen only in this kind of form. So this is a notion that we have. And interestingly enough, this is a notion that at least today the pandemic has struck down to a large extent. So this is again, I start now by looking at the history or a background of the chaos theory. How did it emerge or what was the background? And I've given you here again one more cartoon of two butterflies. And the statement underneath the cartoon is that remember that hurricane 1,000 miles away, that was me. This cartoon will make sense to you if you look at the next two slides that I'm going to show you. You see, now we are looking at somebody called as Edward Lawrence, who was working in MIT, and he was a meteorologist. In 1960, he was working on the problem of weather predictions. And as he was looking at modeling the weather, he suddenly found that his computer program did not in any way theoretically predict the weather as it might be, even though, according to the data he had received, he was quite sure that the weather would be like this. But it did not work out. So this led him to the problem of wondering why weather is unpredictable, or why is it that weather cannot be captured. In the next slide, I'll show the graph that he had created to show this weather prediction. I'm just showing you, so don't worry about understanding it. We're not trying to understand. But you can see that his graph showed him a big variation. It was not something that was very clear. So it was in waves. It was not at all in a clear kind of manner. And what was very predictable, he thought, was totally unpredictable because he was unable to find out how this was being brought out. So Lawrence makes a statement that I'm not reading his statement, it is visible for you. He made a statement that when he returned back, there had been a displacement of several units in the decimal points. And I'm a little sorry, there's a typographical error. The statement, there was a small mistake there. Please read it in the sense that it is STATEMENT. So the initial round of errors led to him thinking that there is something called as disorder in the world. Now, this was a very, very important statement that he made because for the first time, science started thinking that dynamism, radicalness, and in a way, unpredictability could be possible. But for almost a decade or so, people did not take this seriously, even though he had made a statement. And it was only after 1970 that people started using the notion of the chaos theory. So now, when you are looking at chaos, it says that it is something that is a law of nature, which will entail the entire future behavior of the system. But it is also the fact that it is something that is in disarray or in confusion because there is nothing called as determined notion of the behavior. The second thing that he brought with the notion of the butterfly was that he said that there is a feature known as the sensitive dependence, or more colorfully as the butterfly effect. He explained it by saying that if the butterfly flaps its wing, that probably the weather would change somewhere else, not exactly where it flapped, but somewhere else. So there is a sensitivity in the environment which could create some kind of a situation. So let me just go back before I look at the components. I'll just say that, let's say, something that happened in a small place in China, like, for example, the COVID, which you thought maybe a year ago was just a small thing that happened in China. But you see that by the time you started learning, you heard that something in Europe had started getting disrupted in Italy, in Spain, in many other places. And then you thought, anyway, I'm sitting cozy, I'm in India, nothing is happening to me. And then the next story you hear is the massive number of deaths that happen in New York and in USA and also in UK, where you're also shocked to hear that somebody like the Prime Minister himself gets in UK. And then the next story you hear is in India that from March we are struggling with this. Now you see the effect was somewhere and then it started spreading all over, leading to a sense that everything in this world doesn't have any kind of order. So now I move to a statement of saying what are the components of this kind of theory. The components of this theory are that there are six that I pointed out for you. Strange attractors. Now, strange attractors is a reference to what attracts this disorder. We have no idea or no clue. That is why they're called as strange attractors. For example, when a flower pollinates, you are very clear that the flower pollination happens because a butterfly has come or, the pollen grains have fallen or something like that. You are very, very clear about it. Whereas here, in this kind of chaos theory, you don't have any idea about who are the attractors and how does that attraction lead to something like a disorderly manner of life. The butterfly effect. As I told you, Lawrence made the statement that if the butterfly flaps its wing at one point, let's say it flaps its wing here sitting, because I'm sitting in Pondicherry, I'm making the statement. Let's say it flaps its wing in Pondicherry. And because of the way it has flapped, maybe it has done something to the wind, that the wind that has traveled, let's say, somewhere like, in Texas or in New York, has become, let's say, a cyclone or a hurricane or something like that. So he makes the statement that the flap, or in other words, it is the notion of the sensitivity. That's what he's trying to explain, the sensitivity of anything. Then self organization. Chaos theory also moves into a sense of trying to discuss what could be complexity. That after a period of disorder or something, the world or the disorder that has happened or the universal components of disorder could possibly organize itself so that some order is established. For example, just now, as I was telling you, with the COVID 19, we have been living from March onwards with it. But in the beginning, we were all, troubled by it. We did not know how to live our own lives. We were unsure, what we had to do day in and day out because we were unable to go even out for anything. We were worried. But now we have found some order. We have started learning how to use the internet more intelligibly. We have started learning how to use the mask. We have started learning going out and possibly buying things. So there is some organization that has happened. The fourth function is something called as a wave function, which means that, as I told you, there is a sense of moving up and down. And it's not that disorder means that it is so chaotic that you cannot, but it means that something has moved up and down. And the disarray is in some way not a disarray in that sense that there is total meaninglessness. Somewhere there is some sense of it. It is an anthropic principle because it connects the world and the notion of evolution in some way. Because even when we begin to talk about evolution happened with the notion that there is the idea that there was a Big Bang theory, which left everything in chaos and everything came back to some kind of it. The edge of chaos, when we move into the idea that we are at the edge of chaos, we realize that somehow or the other we could possibly make some sense and we could possibly govern ourselves. So these are the components of the chaos theory, which, if we need to, we can use to read a particular text. I'm not trying to say that I'm using any scientific principles. I know that I've gone out of science. But definitely, when we read a text, as I told you in the very beginning, we always have this idea that we can do suppositions and presuppositions. And if it can be objectively answered through something, then that becomes much more valuable. And that is the reason why the components of this theory are helpful for us to explain a number of statements with regard to the lives that we lead and the books that we read. Let me look at the effect of the chaos theory that I already told you about the butterfly effect. And I also told you that small scale changes can create or produce massive unpredictable changes in outcome. Why I'm pointing this out particularly is because any work of fiction, even poetry, could be the same. Maybe, I'll give you an example. Let me just complete this statement. That a small thing that happens could lead to a number of different effects that are there. For example, let me just take or give you an example, which struck me just now as I was reading this to you about the poem by Coleridge, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. If you look at that, that was a very, very small thing that happens, and it was unpredictable that the sailor decided to kill the albatross. But once that happened, you can see the kind of turbulence that it led to. And you also find that it is not something that was placed in the past, because historically it gets repeated, because the sailor has to go on repeating that story every time. Unless he does that, he is unable to live. So you see, what we are looking at is the butterfly effect here in some way. Now the question is that how do we, distinguish? I'm just giving you these questions. I'm not really answering them, but you may have this kind of queries, that question, or things that come to you. How do I distinguish between a micro world and a macro world, where I have no control at all, whereas the micro world is something that I have a control on? How do I, determine free will, where there's a world that is, controlled by deterministic chaos or an unruliness? How do writers reveal the sense of insecurity and disorderliness in their work? As I told you, I'm not answering these questions. They were questions that cropped up in my mind as I was running through these, and that have also been posed by other writers. So I just thought, if you want to reflect, you can think about them. So now the question is, what kind of text should we be looking at to understand this notion of the chaos theory? A central issue when choosing the primary material for a study of scientific ideas in literary texts is that whether the idea should be treated as primary, that is, the scientific idea, should it be primary, and its appearance when it comes in literature, should that be secondary, is a question that we should have in mind. The second is that many literary critics who study chaos theory in literature have shown that, how the unpredictability and non-linearity of chaotic systems are generally reflected both in the plot as well as in the textual elements, which means to say that the earlier statement that the scientific ideas are the primary need not be very true. There have been a number of studies with regard to the idea of, chaos theory, and I will just be looking at, the return of the native, because I find that there have been a large number of people who have used chaos theory, who have used it, explained it in various kinds of ways. They have worked on Stern, they have worked on Fielding, they have worked on Faulkner, they have worked on even Alice Munro, and they have shown how chaos theories helps us to understand these texts. Now, just as an example, as an illustration, I'm looking at the return of the native. And here you see there is a statement, at least in the work, if you have looked at the return of the native. One of the broad statements that has come in the return of the native is that Thomas Hardy's work is thought to be something that mentions that everything is determined and one cannot change the topography of the land. And if you know the story of this particular work, or if you don't know, go back and have a reading of the summary, because I don't really have the time to run through the whole story. You will find that the barrow, or the area where the story occurs, it seems somehow that it can devastate and hold people together. Now, the notion of the title itself discusses the idea about a native who returns back and who is very clear that he wants to stay back in the land and doesn't want to move at all. But there's so much of unpredictability that happens because of a number of coincidences that happen throughout. Because the man, first and foremost, wrong marries Clemmy O'Bright as a protagonist. He marries the wrong person, or maybe in a way, a person who may be not suited to him. I won't say wrong person, but somebody probably who's not suited to him. Then he has a clash with his mother and the wife. Then, unfortunately, his mother dies, and he is guilt prone. And also, along with that, the fact is that he starts losing his eyesight due to some strange problems. And by the time the novel ends, he is unclear what he should be doing, and he becomes a wanderer, giving sermons all over the land there in that region. So you see, the question of the native itself becomes a trouble something. And the attraction here, even though this is not, a strange attraction, but the attraction here is that there is a very beginning of the novel begins with this woman called as Eustacia, who is so very beautiful and so very attractive. But she is attracted to something that is beyond the region in which she stays, and which she thinks is the notion of a city. But she doesn't know what it is. She thinks that somewhere there is an attraction and she wants to gain it. And her every step of the way creates this notion that, all the individuals fall into a sense of disarray by the time the novel ends. So you see, we are looking at the return of the native, where, for example, human identity, which is thought to be fixed, is not really as fixed as it seems to be. There is an idea that the systems take no account of the individuals, but you also see that there is a resistance from the individuals towards the system, creating ripples like the butterfly effect. So much so that by the time the novel ends, the ripples are so hard that you cannot reconcile and say that the novel's ending is good. So you see that you are having openness, you find that there's a self organization, there is adaptiveness, strange attractors, a number of things that have been happening throughout this kind of a thing. So, what we are looking at is basically the idea that when we are trying to recognize something like this notion of an effect, or the notion of kind of text where plausibly we are looking at how do we read the text, we should be clear that we know what is chaos theory to apply it and not just say that we are applying it. But definitely, any theory that we use always has its own kind of critiques. And there has been a critique of people who have used the chaos theory too, especially people from the literary background, because there have been statements made by many scientists saying that, in fact, there was a big article in the Boston Mail saying that, people who do not know science should not even be touching it. So it is like saying that, just because I do not know what is the idea of, empathy, I should not be talking about it at all. But I can be empathetic towards somebody who is in problems, isn't it? So the concept of science cannot be transferred according to this critic. Science and literature are poles apart, so we should not be using it. That applications of chaos theory to specific works of literature have been forced and unilluminating, especially, when there was this film made called as Butterfly Effect. That's a film which has got three different times, number. I think Butterfly Effect 1, Butterfly Effect 3 have 2 have come. And there's a film called as Havana, where there is the main actor makes a mention that he's responding to the notion of chaos. So people have hit back against these, saying that we are not really bothered by these statements because science is science and literature cannot be using this, nor popular culture should be using it. So, but as I told you, we should be bothered with the notion because I began my talk by saying that we are looking at the notion of humanistic responses. And humanistic responses are responses to society. And it doesn't matter from where we draw our source, we should be able to use it to analyze the problems where we are situated and by which we gain better knowledge. Because always the struggle from people who come from the background of literature is that, science people always say we are relevant because we do something. And somehow it seems that we are irrelevant. We don't seem to do anything. We just seem to be sitting in some kind of a room, continuously theorizing or reading something. But the point is that we are the ones who generate ideas, because we are the people who actually look at what are the theoretical frameworks, and we know how to utilize it to develop critical thinking. Because unless you have critical thinking, we cannot move forward in the world. So I would say that I'm not trying to tell you that chaos theory is the most important, but what I'm trying to tell you is that theory of any kind is definitely important, because it leads us to know how to use or read text in much more meaningful way and provide maybe better thought process for us to think. So the work that has been initiated in this regard, there has been a Society for Literature, Science and the Arts which was founded in 1985. This connects humanities and sciences. There has been a number of modern language societies, platforms where there has been discussions of science and literature. There has been a study of narrative literature sessions on the implications itself of chaos theory and literary studies. There has been the Society for Chaos Theory in Psychology and Life Sciences, which features many times a number of literary topics. So let me hope that I have, not in any way created more chaos in your mind by doing chaos theory. I have just put up a cartoon where it says, all in all, I did say it's a pretty convincing explanation of chaos theory. I'm not so sure whether it was very convincing, but definitely I did enjoy doing this. So let me say thanks. And if any of you want, I do have a few references at the end of the slide. Later, in case the slides are shared, you can have a look at it. Thank you very much for this session.
Uh, Thank you so much, ma'am. I am sure all the chaos has dispersed after your after your talk. So it was really mesmerizing talk, ma'am. And for the last 1 hour, while listening to you, I was reliving my students' days. It was so resourceful, so pertinent, and so illustrious, and very stimulating also. So I am quite sure there will be many questions for ma'am from our august audience. So I don't want to be a barrier between them and her. So I request the administrator to highlight the pertinent questions for on the screen.
How long?
Ma'am, for 10-15 minutes.
Yeah.
Ma'am, shall I read it out? Uh,
Yes,
so the
I can
question,
see the question.
okay, ma'am.
The impacts of James' book on making a new science in chaos theory. See, as I told you, there have been a number of works that have come. It's not just James Gillespie. There have been a lot of other people who have talked about it. And in each of these statements that have come, that we have discussed, the problem that has arisen is that, basically the question is that, are we, for example, there is Cribbin John's work on Search of the Edge of Time, or we have having somebody like Catherine Hales, who has done a lot of work on chaos and order, complex dynamics in literature and science. But you see, as I already told you, a large number of these works have been actually in a way dismissed by people who come from the scientific background, saying this doesn't in any way help, because this is taking science away from science and doing something new, and we are creating assumptions about it. So I would say that, if you want to look at the impact of a text, I would say don't look at the impact. As long as you can learn from any text, that is the most important point. It should not be uh, using these words like impact. Somehow I'm a bit bothered with this. I don't want to use the word impact. I feel that as long as my breadth, there is a broadening of my idea or knowledge, then I'm very happy. That has made an impact. That's enough. Why should we be bothered how big the impact is? Then you are saying that, chaos theory, what impact is it making in the world? So I would answer with that. Hopefully, I think the person has understood.
Uh, Next question, please. Shomo.
Yes, this is the neurotic disorder and the claustrophobic situation of Mary in Lessing's The Grass is Singing, considered to be chaotic. Can it be interpreted as chaos theory? As I already told you, you see that one of the statements was that behavior itself is unpredictable because, as I told you, when you look at behavior, behavior is conditioned and socializing, and whatever is considered to be the norm, you think is rational. But as we also said, many of the writers who come from the background of feminism, let's say, Susan Gubar and Sandra Gilbert's work about the mad woman in the attic, or, about, people who behave in a very different manner, who show random behavior, let's say schizophrenia itself. Now, they all come under the notion of what you call as chaos theory, and there has been work basically in psychoanalysis and psychology relating this idea of neurosis and claustrophobia and schizophrenia with regard to chaos theory. So, if you would like to, definitely you can. But if it is also something that you can accommodate with the other components that I told you, then it would be better rather than just taking one principle from that and using it here. So I think that would where I would say that you can do the interpretation. I hope I answered Amita. How is chaos theory far from existentialism? Don't they overlap? Could science fiction, for instance, be analyzed with chaos theory? Definitely, science fiction can be analyzed because anyway, many science fictions, for a story like Thomas Pynchon's Entropy, if you want to look at, or let's say your many of your Harry Potter works, they are dependent on the notion of chaos theory. So there's nothing big about that statement. But I would be more interested in this notion of existentialism. You see, when we looked at existentialism, one of the statements that existentialism was making to a large extent was that existentialism was trying to bring in this idea of, your no idea about your essence or your being in the world, that which comes first, whether you exist, or is it your essence that comes first. And the idea was somewhere along the way we are people who are born with free will, and we have choices, and depending on the choices we can live our existence. But you see, chaos theory is not talking to you about any choice. In fact, in chaos theory, I would say that you don't have a choice. Let's say, where is the statement that you have a choice in a pandemic like this now? Do you have a choice? Can I ever get out of this? Can I say that I'm not going to participate in this pandemics and move out? I cannot do that. So you see, that is where I would say that chaos theory is a bit different from existentialism, even though it questions the notion of survival, but it doesn't bring you the idea that as existentialism there is a choice which you can choose. You don't have choice in chaos theory. It disrupts you to such an extent that you are stuck in it and you are not able to know how to get out of it. So I hope that Himanshu, I hope you got the answer that you were looking for. How is chaos literature different from dystopian literature? Um, what should I say? Dystopia and utopia. Utopia, we always keep making ideals. We keep making ideals for ourselves. We keep saying, oh, yes, we'll have this, we'll do this. And dystopia says that all those ideals are deconstructed. We don't need any of these. And chaos literature is different because chaos literature is not talking to you about any ideals at all. It is telling you that you are carried in a current. And in this current, how do you make sense of the moments of your life is more important. That is why I gave you an example of the return of the native. And as I was giving you the talk, I gave you the rhyme of the ancient mariner. Because there you see, there's nothing like an ideal. They just get caught in the flow of events. And once you're caught in the flow of events, you're just carried forward. You cannot stop, and once you are carried forward, you have to make do with the moment in which you are living. So that is what I would say is dystopian literature and where chaos literature differs from that.
Ma'am,
Yes, Shraddha?
I have two questions from my colleagues. One is
Yes,
from
please ask.
VC Pandey sir. That is,
Yes.
how can chaos theory help us negotiate a literary text? And the second one from Muhammad Safedanis is the
Mm.
idea that hidden patterns exist even in the seemingly chaotic situations a part of chaos theory. Can we apply this to literature? These are the two questions raised by my colleagues.
Can you just tell me the first question, the
Uh,
first one that you said?
the first
How
one
can
was
chaos,
chaos
how
theory
does chaos theory help us negotiate a literary text, right?
text. Yes, yes.
Yeah, it helps us. See, I'm not trying to say that we can negotiate a literary text because I already began by telling you that when we read any work of literature, we are looking at it with some kind of, suggestive modes of thinking. Because we already go to a text with something in our mind. We have some basic experiences, or we have some presuppositions, we have some ideology. We go and read a text. Fine. But you see, when we have, let's say, something at the background which is more objective, which is more principled, let's say, which is not working on the notion of our subjective experience, then it helps us better because we learn how to negotiate the literary text and know how, in a way that this is disorder because many texts that we read, especially novels we read, we find that there is no reason or meaning to it. Sometimes it happens. For example, because I teach 19th because I teach 19th century British literature, I'm using these examples. For example, in Wuthering Heights, I still wonder, even today, how many times I've taught that text, but I still wonder what is it that made the protagonist there, Catherine, not marry Heathcliff? What was
Right.
the background? Because still there was the fact that she was about to marry him, but at that point, she did not. Now, if I'm trying to understand that unreasonable, unpredictable behavior of hers, because for a minute till that particular paragraph came, I did not think she would deny marrying him. But she did. So now the question is whether she wanted a better kind of life that she wanted, which is what many people say, or is it because somewhere in her mind there was some other problem that was there where she thought maybe she's not fit for him, or was it because, in a certain kind of way that Heathcliff himself was plausibly in a way a brother because maybe he was born to that man who brought him home, Mr. Earnshaw, but we are not shown that. So maybe he's a sibling and she knew it and she couldn't marry a sibling, let's say. I don't know. There is so much of unpredictability there that happens. Now, if I had this access to chaos theory, it is easy for me to understand that there is some kind of disorder. Why should I be bothered with reasoning? Reasoning is something that I'm born with and continuously being told to use. If I don't have to use, why can't I not use it? So you see, I can understand the text better if I don't bother about that instance at all. So I would say that it helps me to negotiate a literary text because I can understand a little better now about disarray, confusion, or disorder. So I hope I answered Professor Pandey's question. Let me look at the other question that hidden patterns exist even in seemingly chaotic situations. That is precisely what I gave you with the example of the rhyme of the ancient mariner and the return of the native, because I was trying to tell you that there are hidden patterns. We don't know what those patterns are, but they have influenced the whole idea about what happens next. They, in our own world, we may call it coincidences, but in the chaos theory, they're called as attractors. So you see that this is what we are trying to say. We are not trying to say that chaos theory is trying to, shift our focus. It's just trying to make us understand or make things more relevant to us. So there are hidden patterns, definitely. And these hidden patterns many times are invisible for us. We work in a situation or a system where there are continuously hidden patterns. So I think that we can definitely you look at it. There is a question by Ankita saying, can the butterfly effect be compared to the snowball effect? I don't think I would like to use the snowball effect because the butterfly effect doesn't talk about anything snowballing. It talks to you about the fact that, there is a disarray or a confusion that prevails because of certain incidences that happen somewhere. And this could lead to other kinds of problems because somewhere, as I told you, chaos theory also moves with the idea that there is as I told you, a situation where it talks to you about a notion of a complexity, because it talks to you that situations can be complex, but it doesn't talk to you about snowballing as such. So I don't think I would like to use that word. Again, we are going to Guattari and Deleuze and things like that. You see that when we talked about chaos theory, you may find it amusing, but already, even before chaos theory had come, we had begun with something like, this kind of disarray in literature, because the moment that deconstruction came, with Derrida saying that language itself has plural ideas or meanings, that logocentrism is not possible, grand narratives are not possible. All these that cropped up from the time that we started with Derrida, Deleuze, or Guattari, all these ideas have started in some way in literature. We are only now trying to make more sense by using something that comes from science. So I would like to say that they are all something that have started beginning with what I called as post-structuralism, because we started living in a world that was no longer the same as the earlier times. And to make sense of the lives in which we lead, we had to grasp onto something, and these theories started helping us. So, Devashit, I hope I
Ma'am,
answered
we'll
you.
take two more questions.
Okay.
And after that, we'll complete.
Um, No, I don't think chaos theory and concept of post-truth are overlapping, because post-truth is more the question of the notion of absolute truth itself. Because what is truth is itself questionable. Chaos is not talking to you about truth at all. It is talking to you about the sense of life in which you are, where you get caught in a system where you are unable to do anything. Truth is something different. Truth is more like saying, let's say that I just now tell you that I am sitting here in my room, and in my bedroom, or probably my living room, and I'm giving this talk. But that's the truth that I'm telling you. But the truth may be something else. I may not even be sitting here in my room. I may be sitting in somebody else's house. I may be sitting in, let's say, some other place. I'm telling you, I'm in Pondicherry. I may be in Chennai. I may be in Bangalore. I may be somewhere else. So I'm creating truths which are different, which are not the same. And I am creating one notion of this notion of stable truth, but I'm building up on it continuously. Whereas in chaos theory, we are looking at a system, as I told you, where you are caught unawares. Whereas when you are talking about truth, it is you who make the truths, whatever are the truths. Whereas in chaos theory, you are not making anything. You are caught in the coincidences or the moments, and you are unable to catch hold of them. So that is what I don't want to call it as rationality at all. We are not even talking about rationality here. We are talking about something that is irrational, which is unpredictable, and which is totally out of our focus. Yes, Anindo, you said one more
Ma'am,
question. Shekhar,
one more
I hope I
question.
answered.
This is the
Prabhat
last
has a
one, ma'am.
question. Yes, Mrs. Dalovi, there is a work that has been done on Virginia Woolf, connecting, chaos theory to Virginia Woolf's works. And I don't know the name of the writer, but probably I can look at that up and send you. She has worked on Stern, Fielding, Virginia Woolf, and Faulkner, if I'm not mistaken. You can access that. So there has been work on that. Any other
Uh,
questions,
I,
Anando?
I think that's all. Somo, is there any other questions? Okay, I guess this is the last one, ma'am. Thomas, ma'am, could you share with us what is the difference between trauma theory and chaos theory? This is the last
Uh,
question.
Trauma theory is basically a question of what we look at as trauma or pain, or something that strikes us emotionally, you see. Whereas, as I already told you, don't forget the fact that we begin with chaos theory in science. Science doesn't talk to you about emotions. Science is more practical. It talks to you about dynamisms of what is a complex situation, and what is the universe. And in fact, one of the statements about chaos theory is also about fractals. For example, the fractal is, let's say, looking at a coastline. You see that you can never measure a coastline, because when you have to measure a coastline, you don't know where you start and where you end. Should you take the curves that are there, or you should take the round figure that is there, or should you take the borders? Even though geographically we have mapped the coastline, we cannot map it at all in the real sense. So you see, chaos theory is generally looking at something that is more of a scientific background, where it is trying to talk about how scientific matter itself leads to problematic situations. Whereas when we are looking at trauma, it is more emotional, something that has made you suffer to such an extent that it has led you into a dismay, that you have disintegrated because of that. So it is more a very, very individual, subjective notion. And in fact, for somebody to grasp it is very difficult. Let's say that you who are sitting there on the other side have gone through a lot of abuse in your life. I can never get into that abuse because I don't know it. It is something that belongs to you, it doesn't belong to me. Whereas in chaos theory, I'm not talking about that. I'm also caught in it. So I know when I'm caught in it that I'm caught in this. That's what is the thing I would like to say. So there's a vast difference between these. And please remember that we are looking at a scientific principle. We are not looking at something that comes from an individual.
Thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am, for this interactive session and the questions session. Uh, Thank you once again. I'm so glad that you have accepted our invitation and delivered such a beautiful talk. Now I invite my colleague, Mohammad Tabarak Ansari, to propose the formal vote of thanks.
Anindo, just one question. Can I have?
Yes, ma'am. Please.
Like people who heard me, were they at least able to understand, you think?
I'm sure, ma'am, they have understood because the comment section is flooded with all good comments, all positive comments, and everybody is
Okay.
praising your lecture and all. So I'm sure
Okay, good.
everybody is beneficiary.
Because
So
my
I request,
intention is that everybody should understand.
it was very lucid and it was very intriguing. Thank you so much. Uh, okay, no, now I request Mohammad Tabarak Ansari sir to propose the
Yeah.
formal vote of thanks.
Thank you, Professor Dr. Anandya, for giving me the chance to say out for thanks for this session. Honorable Vice Chancellor Professor Ranjit Kumar Varma, Munger University, Munger. Respected Professor H. Kalpana Rao Ma'am, our Chief Speaker. Dr. B.C. Pandey, convener of this e-conference. Respected Professor Dr. Tausif Mohsin Saab, Associate Professor, Munger University, Munger. Dr. Abhimanyu Kumar, Dr. Anindya Sundarpali, moderator of this session. Professor Muhammad Shafee Danish, Professor Rimpi Sarkar, Professor Priya Ranjan Tiwari, Professor Atanu Kumar Pal, Dr. Ajay Kumar, participants, ladies and gentlemen. A hearty thanks to all, and a special thanks to the speaker, Professor H. Kalpana Rao, who enriched and enlightened us with findings and opinions regarding the topic in this webinar. Many thanks, ma'am. My sincere thanks to Dr. B.C. Pandey sir, who organized such a beautiful program skillfully and intellectually. At last, I give thanks to the participants who raised questions regarding the topic. Without this, we can't imagine a full session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tawarak sir. Now we'll end the session, and I thank man once again from the core of my heart. Now, may I request the attendees to rejoin us for the next session at 3 p.m. sharp in the fourth session. Professor Madhusmita Prati from RD Women's University Bhubaneswar will talk on the topic Dalitism and Gender through the lenses of select Dalit women autobiographies. And Dr. N. Jacob from Ramjas College, University of Delhi will talk on the topic New Formalism. Do join us for those two exciting talks. Thank you, one and all.
Thanks once again for everything, everyone, whoever has been there.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. What is it?